In the symphony of life, the God within black men sings a melody of endurance and grace, a timeless refrain passed down through generations of kings. Their spirits, resplendent with the echoes of ancestors' dreams, rise like incense to the heavens, a sacred offering of strength and wisdom. Each step taken is a dance of defiance against the shadows of history, a testament to the indomitable spirit that dwells within them. With crowns forged from the fires of perseverance, these men of regal bearing navigate the contours of existence with a divine purpose unrivaled. In their eyes, the stories of triumph and tribulation are etched in golden calligraphy, a testament to the resilience that beats in the rhythm of their hearts. As they embrace their royal heritage, they illuminate the world with a light that shines from the depths of their souls, a beacon of hope and guiding inspiration for all who witness their majestic presence. My name is Danielle Desiree, and welcome to KINGZ. Hello, and welcome to KINGZ. I'm your host, Danielle Desiree, and today I have a wonderful guest with me by the name of Alex McKinnon. Alex, tell everyone a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Let's see. I don't know. That's kind of a tough one. Not really. I guess I'm a business owner. I'm a licensed massage therapist. My focus is on healing people, physical, mental, spiritual. I like to create. I don't know. It's been a interesting life. I rise to my challenges. I don't know how well shall I describe myself?
Oh, that's great. That's great. I love it. I do. And you did it without going into the basics, age, where you're from, all the labels, things
Oh
of that.
yeah. Yes.
So thank you for joining us today. It is a privilege to have you on. I knew that this was going to be a great episode just because you always drop such knowledge and depth every time I talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. You're welcome. So we're just going to jump right in. But with KINGZ, as you know, I wanted to create this to celebrate Black men in the world. Oftentimes, you hear so much negativity from society about Black men, whether it's talking about Black men with crime or social conditioning, or making it seem like all Black men have these issues like baby daddies, and just hear so much negativity, but I don't hear positive things and that the things that y'all are doing in the world that need to be celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
Hear people talking about the resilience or the strength or the divinity or the overcoming in your lives. And I wanted to create a space for that where you can just be yourself, talk freely. And this is what I really wanted to do with KINGZ. So if it's okay with you, tell me a little bit about what your experience like growing up, the Black male.
Oh, okay. So now that's really going to get into where I'm from. Definitely growing up as a Black male was different and difficult for many different reasons due to the point in time at which I was born in and where I was born. So I'm from Tennessee. If you don't know, I'm pretty sure your guests won't know that, but that is the South. And it's not the deep South, but it's South enough. Most of the racial tensions were in the South. And so I grew up in the 80s, early 90s as affirmative action was taking place and there was a social consciousness to, I guess, society in the US where they were really beginning to come around from the Jim Crow and then the civil rights movements to really integrating this stuff. So a lot of the racism was still overt, but a lot more subversive racism. So that was kind of the climate that I grew up in. And so while I can definitely point to things were kind of really in your face and intense when I was when I was younger, it was like a lot more overt. And then as I grew up, it was a lot more subversive, meaning like, no one overtly said stuff, but they still excluded you without saying stuff, so you had to read between the lines socially. So for me, it was an environment at which I encountered overt racism, and then I encountered subversive racism, exclusionary, maybe, not saying things to my face, but saying like not including or intentionally creating barriers of entry so that way I wouldn't be there or anyone like me. So it was a very, very interesting time growing up. There were a lot of difficulties with that. And so, it really made it difficult to relate, like self-relation to myself and other people, because I was catching flack from all of the ends socially. And so I also caught it in my family as well. And so there's one thing that we probably should talk about as Black people that most people outside of the community don't know, and that is cultural perceived Blackness, right? And so, as you can tell, I speak clearly and I enunciate very clearly, and that was a problem for my family and a lot of people around me. It was like I always got labeled as, "You sound white." I was like, I don't. I just want to speak clearly. I just want to sound educated. And they're like, no, that's not good enough. So there was an exclusionary factor from both the Black side and the white side. So I kind of had to develop my own sense of self as I progressed through life.
And that's interesting because we have that in common. And I'm a Black woman, but I went through the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Moved when I was younger. My parents divorced. So I moved from a predominantly Caucasian area to an African American area. And this was in the middle of me being in middle school. So when I first got there, I got the same thing. Everybody was perplexed and they were like, "Why are you talking like a white girl?" I remember I was so confused.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like what? But it helped me to understand. Now, over time, no one cared anymore. It was just, okay,
Right.
that's just Daniel talks. But in the beginning, yeah, I caught a lot of slack for it too. And I couldn't understand why. But you're right. It's interesting within our culture that even though we get ostracized by other cultures, we do it within our own as well with, how we talk or how someone else looks or what their style is like or even what they like, what their preferences are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the area where you were from that you were talking about, was it somewhat diverse or was it mostly Caucasian?
So just like everywhere in the South, it was segregated in a way in that the lower income communities were the Black communities, and then there were lower income white communities, but it was like the Black people stuck to other Black people or the Black communities and, kind of ventured out in the city. And so there was a lot of just like Black area, white area, and slowly over time, over the 90s and by the early 2000s, it integrated pretty well, but there was a lot of tensions back and forth. And I'm sure that it was even more segregated before, I came onto the scene. This is just my awareness. But yeah, it was, I would go to some places and I would be the only Black person, or, I would go to places and there would be no white people, no Spanish people, or no Latin people, no Asian people, no anything. And, it was kind of just this whole, you know, back and forth of Black and white. And then slowly over the 90s, like other races began to pop up in our area. And so, that kind of gave me a point of reference to where this whole race thing isn't just Black and white. It's, all forms of brown and, Asian, Native American, Arabic, Caucasian. It's just like we're all in it with our own race but for each other. And so that gave me the ability to see into other communities, to see that other communities struggled the same way that we did as a Black community. Maybe not the same way, but like weren't really given their lion's share of the social pie, I guess to say, is like, it was like white people and then everybody else. And that was kind of my understanding, is there was a level of, what is it, camaraderie? Yeah, amongst being a different race other than white. But I also, I see no difference, no issues with white people. They're just people. Everyone wants to put this, put each other against each other, or put like white versus black or white versus Asian or Mexican or whatever. But at the end of the day, we're just people, and most people have nothing to do with that. It's just a societal narrative that keeps us against each other, disempowered, and non-unified.
Right. Out of all the species on this planet, we're the species that finds ways to separate ourselves,
Yeah.
which is interesting, right? But thank you for that and diving into that. As you were growing up, what were your ways dealing with some of that racism and dealing with some of the segregation and some of the things that you experienced?
I mean, I'm mostly, so how I dealt with it internally is, it's video games. Video games were the great distraction and disassociator, but when I couldn't withdraw into myself, I found that, there's kind of this double-edged sword, that if I reacted how people expected, it would perpetuate the narrative. If I got loud, if I got angry, if I got violent, it plays right into their hand. And so I learned from a very early age to subvert expectations, react in a way in which they couldn't predict, and that would leave a much longer lasting effect. And so what that did was that instead of getting angry, I asked questions. Instead of getting angry or hurt or upset, I practiced stoicism in the moment, even though I didn't know that's what it was called. And then I began to really add inquiry and treat people with compassion. Definitely diffused racist situations from other people trying to throw things on me. From the black community, the black standpoint, it was like, oh, you're a pussy. You don't like to fight. You don't stand up for yourself. And I was like, you got to understand the catch-22 that I'm in here. If I become violent, I will get praise from you guys, but I will further damage the reputation of Black people, in this community. But if I don't, like, you guys will reject me, or you guys will not necessarily reject, you just lose social status. Oh, you're not a fighter. Oh, you're not with the cause. I'm like, actually, I am. I just realized that there's a different way to go about it.
Right. Right. And that's true because, thinking about it, there's times where you may want to be that fighter, or sometimes people are. And then there's other things that ensue from that. The situation escalates. Now the police have gotten involved.
Yeah.
And there's something else playing out now.
Yeah.
And it's so important to think before we react. And that's not always easy to do, especially, oh my goodness, I know being a Black man in America, I know that's not easy to do. Speaking on the police, I'm going to touch on that for a moment. Did you ever have any instances growing up? I know that's been going on a lot in society in recent years, or at least it's bringing it to light because it's been going on forever with the unfairness and the mistreatment.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Dealing with Black men in police custody. But did you have those types of experiences growing up?
Yes. Absolutely. You always fit a description. You're always harassed, or at least I was in my experiences. Fortunately, I knew to keep my mouth shut and not talk back to police, but I had friends that did not do that. And so whenever there would be a traffic stop, or they'd see a group of us, obviously there would be police intervention for whatever reason. And then, me and my brother learned to just stay quiet, but we had friends or cousins that would immediately begin to get agitated and speak very disrespectfully to cops. And that always wound up with somebody being taken away for just really realistically being disrespectful and our rights violated. But back then it was just they could make up a reason and get you in the court system. And that was that. There's nothing you could really do about it. And that further perpetuated the negative attitude and sentiment towards cops or law enforcement.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because there are some police officers out there who are the opposite. They want to make a difference and they care about the law. And, it's hard. I know some Black police officers and they grapple with that because it's the same thing. We're going back to the labels again, the narratives. So just like all Black males aren't a certain way or a certain stereotype, all police officers aren't either, but they get that label in that narrative, and gets to be difficult to shake that off.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have some friends that are police officers as well, and I've had like extensive talks with them about this. And a lot of it has to do with the people that hurt you. And so what ends up happening is that police officers that patrol predominantly Black neighborhoods, because of the disrespect, because of the lack of authority, wound up having their lives endangered more by Black people, lower socioeconomic status, because, when people are born close to the edge and are at the edge, they care less and less and less about other people's lives. And so those were the ones that were the most violent. And so if you had repeat offenders of a certain type of person being more and more violent or threatening your life or threatening your partner's lives, or may have killed a friend in duty, you're going to become more hostile towards those people. So therefore, or those group of people or anyone that looks like that. So it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle at which they come into a community, maybe not harass, or maybe a situation where some violence erupts that they have to intervene in, and someone winds up getting hurt that's a police officer, and now that creates this bad taste that's perpetuated for the rest of their career. And so the thing that I've learned about human nature is, if you look for negative things, you will find negative things. If you look for positive things, you will find positive things. And if you look for a certain type of people to hurt you, you will always find confirmation evidence of those people hurting you, even though it may be disproportionate to the rest of your job or your duties. You could have just as many white people hurting you, but since you're so focused on Black people, then that is the case. And so what happens is there tends to be groups of people in law enforcement, and they click together in order to protect themselves or protect a community by shaking down African Americans or Black people or whatever race, if it's Spanish, or Arabic or Middle Eastern. That's kind of the MO. And that's the negative aspect of the police. It's an extreme overcorrection from a self-protection mechanism, is my understanding.
No, I agree with you. Definitely agree with you on that. Regarding mental health and vulnerability, one of the things that I've seen in my lifetime, in my human experience, is that it's been very hard for Black men to be able to be vulnerable safely in the world. And, for a while when I was younger and a kid, I couldn't understand that. I couldn't understand why in our society was that such a bad thing, because we're all human. We're all going to be vulnerable. We need to be vulnerable. We need to be in touch with our emotions. We need to be present with ourselves. But it just seemed like to me when I was younger, that was so shunned upon for Black males. What do you think of some ways we can counteract that? What are some things that were able to make you feel more comfortable as a Black man, where you were able to be more vulnerable, be more present, be true to who you are, and not so worried about society's view and what it looks like if you are being vulnerable or showing any type of emotion versus aggression or, being in the ego or, I'm a man, I can't show vulnerability, that type of thing. Yeah.
I'll tell you my experience, and then I'll tell you why I think it's this way. So first off, like, my experience was you didn't show weakness. Any sort of weakness was picked on and kind of beat out of you. Anytime that emotion was shown, towards any sort of softness or vulnerability, it was made fun of, or I was either physically beat up by, my cousins or my friends in the Black community. And even outside of the Black community, just males in general, like there's no reason to show that vulnerability, or not reason, but like it's not met with softness. I guess that's the male way, but especially doubly so in the Black community, it was always met with some sort of ostracation or even violence. Like, it's like people would feel sorry for you, but like then they'd make fun of you. And then like, if you gave any pushback, it would immediately trigger them into becoming a physical altercation. And so why I think that is, you have to look at the history of the Black male. You have to look at the history of Black people. And it's like, early 1900s, we were slaves, indentured servants. And then you go 30s, 40s, 50s, that's segregation. And then you go 60s, 70s, that's civil rights. So let's think about vulnerability at this time. As a Black man, you had to be the head of the household. And if you showed any sort of weakness or any sort of softness outside of society, like you weren't going to make it, outside of your family unit. So you had to be the strongest thing, the rock, the breadwinner in an unjust world. So there's no room for weakness. There's no room to break down. You don't have the luxury of breaking down. That's, my take on it. That's kind of what I experienced from the older generation. There was no display of vulnerability. So on top of that, there's no language provided to talk about these vulnerable aspects because it's really shut down and frowned upon by the older generation. They usually avoid it or dismiss it. So it's like, I don't even have the language. I don't even have the framework to begin to talk about these things that hurt. It's just usually here, like, oh, you're hurting. Here's some sort of coping mechanism in the form of escapism or substances. This is what we do. This is how we relate, and it's like that level of just like understanding. People will sit with you when you're having like a difficult moment, but they won't discuss. They'll hear you, they'll let you talk it, and like, yeah, it just is what it is. Like that's about the amount of depth people are going to go into to it with you. That was my experience and what I found. And that's both inside the Black community, like it was more hostile to do it just a little bit more. It was a lot less nurturing, but outside the Black community, it was still the same. Nobody had the language to really talk about their feelings. And so for me, I floated along by myself for a long time, just internalizing and thinking about what my feelings were, what vulnerability is, and how to share it. And so it wasn't until I was like 27, 28, because every single time that I would speak out, I would be shut down by both men and women about, these things, because women also perpetuate the idea that a man has to be strong and masculine and can't really talk about his feelings because that's a woman's activity, is to talk about feelings. And so therefore, like, there was no space for me to express this stuff. And the only way for me to even process this stuff was through physical activity, martial arts for me, and building stuff, fixing stuff, like just doing stuff is how I process the emotions. As I worked with my hands, I could process through the difficulty that I was going through. Or like with martial arts, it's like, I don't have time to think about my problems because I have to deal with this person that is coming at me and sparring, or I have to focus on, getting this movement just right. And so that was the way that I figured out how to deal with my vulnerabilities. Now, what happened when I was 27 is that I found a group of people that, demonstrated what emotional safety was. And, behind this mask that I had created, I was falling apart. The mask says that you're good, that you're fine, that, I got this, that's the ego. And so, but behind the ego, my spiritual self was falling apart. And luckily for me, I had cultivated a group of friends, but whenever you're invulnerable, you don't let people in, you don't let people close. And it was just a late night situation to where my guard had fallen down, because it takes a lot of mental energy to keep your guard up, to keep the mask on, that a friend of mine we were having a conversation and authentically relating. And, I broke down in that situation, but, in my mind, the biggest fear was if you break down and if you show an emotional vulnerable state, people will attack you or they'll run away from you. That had been my experience up until that point. And so this friend in which I authentically shared what was going on did neither. It subverted my expectations and kind of got me to be curious as like, okay, I guess I can relate authentically. But I will tell you this, after I had the emotional unloading, there was a lot of shame around, like internal shame around myself for doing that. A lot of men, at least from my understanding, shame themselves when they have vulnerable emotions, because that's what we're met with as men growing up and moving forward. Like, no, you shouldn't be emotional, shame on you. So that shame runs deep, and it took me many years. So from 27 to about 30, 31, to be okay with being vulnerable and sharing emotions, because number one, I didn't have the framework to do it. I didn't have the language to do it. I didn't have the understanding of how to do it. It was a brand new skill, a brand new thing.
Wow. Kudos to you, my brother, for your resilience. That's something. I haven't known you long, but it's been evident how aware you are of who you are in the world and the way you operate in it. How discovering that awareness helps you with, I'm going to say, being more secure and okay when you're operating in that vulnerability or when you are dealing with emotional things.
I got to zoom out for that for a second. And it's like, in order to be okay with it, so you talk about divinity and divine nature. I had to talk about self-relation to the creator, to God, whatever you want to call it, whoever you want to call it, whatever the name is you say it is. It's the relationship to that. And it is that, I am a child of God, ultimately, in my understanding. So that I have that experience above being a Black male. So the relatedness and how I get through the world is that when it is so intense on being a Black male, or like everything's casting me down, I have this safe reprieve of, I'm a child of God. At the end of the day, I am a spirit having the experience of a Black man. And so that gives me a safe base to authentically relate from, rather than I'm a Black man, society says I am bad, so therefore I will act only in what society expects me to react, because why would I react any way different? And so that has allowed me to exhibit vulnerability as a human being, as a spirit having a human experience. And so I had to come to that conclusion on my own. My spirituality is born from the difficulties that I've gone through as a Black male. And as I couldn't rely on anything extrinsically, anything outside of me, I had to learn to rely on what was inside of me, and that was my spirit. And as I developed my spirit more, it became more easier to become vulnerable. And that didn't come until my 20s and 30s. It was like the seed of understanding was there all throughout my life, now that I can look back and see, but it didn't come to its full manifestation until the beginning of my 30s. And so my 30s on into my 40s, or starting into my 40s, is the understanding and the relationship and the strength that comes from that spiritual aspect, that spiritual nature that we all have. And that I have found ultimate relatedness in that, although you may be a Black female or a Black male or a white female or a white male or Asian or whatever, we all have that level of divinity. We all are children of the Most High. And so rather than just treat you as what I see you as, I'll treat you as what my spirit knows you as. And that is a child of the Creator. So that erases and gets past a lot of friction, because I have a view that's greater than what has been evident to me, than what, I have just seen. I have a view that I know, from a higher, that gets rid of and has smoothed over a lot of issues. And that has helped with the self-awareness, because the awareness of self relating to self. The awareness of awareness is the beginning of the spiritual aspect. So I have a very rich spiritual life that has been cultivated by the self-awareness that helps me relate in the world day to day.
I love that. It sounds like you've done a great way of cultivating your life from the inside out versus the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oftentimes, society projects onto us living our lives from the outside in. Like we're having to live our lives based upon the environment around us and what's going on around us. When you touched on it a lot, and you were talking about knowing that you are a spirit that is in a body, having an experience,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so coming from the inside out, you're able to look at life differently and move through life differently and know that no matter what's going on in the external, it's not going to change who you are at your core, you know?
Bingo.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. So name this Kings because you know what I see when I look at Black men in the world and all of the wonderful things that I associate with Kings. But when I say the word to you, what does that mean? What does that word king mean to you?
One who masters their domain. And so, your domain, whatever you say, is what you choose as an individual. And so someone of kinglyship, in my mind, is someone who has mastered their chosen domain. And so if I were to extrapolate that out, whenever I hear kings, I just hear someone of high self-mastery.
Oh, I love that. Dropping those gems today, Alex. Love that. So before we end and wrap this up, once again, thank you so much. It is a privilege every time I get to converse with you.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. And if there was anything, when you look back at your experience in life, walking through it as a Black man, if there was anything that you could say and share about your experience to help other kings out there, what would it be?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is probably an interesting take. You might not hear this from many other people, but number one, don't be glad that you're born a Black male, because here's the thing is, yes, it will be difficult. There's no doubt about it. Society says you're at the bottom of the totem pole socially and that you have a lot to overcome. However, what I can say in my experience, and what will be true for your experience as well, is that if you rise to the occasion, you will be gifted lessons that other people do not have. You'll be way more resilient than your compatriots if you choose to rise to this level, because the level of awareness that you have to have because of the difficulty isn't programmed into any other race, at least in America. It could be the case somewhere else in the world, but the difficulty will create a metamorphosis inside of you that will make you one of the strongest. It will be easier to be a leader in whatever aspect that you have, because you will have to overcome so much. And every time that you overcome something, you gain experience, and that experience continues to teach you on throughout your life. So if you let go of the victim mentality and accept the blessing that it is to move and relate through this world, you'll find that you have that inner bastion, that inner strength that could not have been gifted to you any other way other than through difficulty. And so, what I would say to you is be kind to yourself. The world is going to try to get you to hate yourself. And that's what I see, that a lot of people are suffering from pain, at which the relationship between themselves and society is so negative that they internalize that negativity and begin to attack themselves. So if you can, the Black man that will hear my voice after this, is learn to love yourself, learn to cultivate that relationship with your higher self, and, don't internalize that negativity, and instead use it as a challenge to draw on your inner strength. Then you have a course, a pathway from the universe that will turn you into one of the best in any sort of your kingly domain that you choose, because you will have to have faced so much more than everyone else.